Welcome, everybody. My name is Tracy Ross Kretschmer, and I am the event planner here at the CWC PCN. We are using Zoom webinar. Maybe you've attended a couple of these now, but I just thought I'd let you know the Q&A feature is available for you to ask questions. Attendees can also upvote those questions or comment on them. Question order will automatically change based on the number of upvotes. We've disabled the chat function, but if you do want to get a hold or ask a question out loud, just use the raise hand function. There's a little hand icon on the participant list. But please keep in mind we are recording, so if you do want to say something loud, you will be recorded. So with that, today's presentation is the last one of our series. It's titled Performance Management and Corrective Action. And your presenter is again Cindy Sidhu. She's the HR consultant generalist from Salapac. She has a background as an HR generalist consultant with over 10 years of experience in all facets of employee and labor relations, with extensive experience in the healthcare industry. Our Q&A moderator is Zoe Zenick, and she's joining us. She is the HR coordinator with Salapac and has spent the past 2.5 years supporting their team, both in-house and on client work, which is included training and development, recruitment, policies, and procedures. So with that, welcome everybody. And Cindy, I leave the
Awesome. Thank you. I feel like there's a bit of an echo. You can hear me well? Yes? Okay. Thanks, Tracy. Welcome everyone to today's HR webinar, which is the last webinar of the 5-part HR series. And in today's webinar, as Tracy mentioned, we'll be delving into the world of performance management. So getting started here. Salapac and Associates, of course, is a team of human resources consultants. We specialize in strategy, human resources, and board governance. Our team of associates each have more than 15 years of experience. And in addition, our specialists have advanced human resource and business designations. So session objectives for today's webinar include understanding the why of performance management and to better understand how to be more effective in your coaching styles. I will also discuss performance review forms and feedback, and then go over ways to manage employees when performance isn't exactly where it needs to be. So what exactly is performance management? The exact definition is that it's a process or a system by which an organization measures and improves performance within its workforce. And an organization may use performance management to monitor performance, either at the organizational level, a team level, or more commonly at the individual level. And some common elements of a performance management system include performance reviews, manager one-on-ones, peer feedback, performance improvement plans, goal setting and tracking, and rewards and recognition programs. Why even bother with performance management? That's a big question. So essentially, it's about setting expectations with employees and providing them feedback on how they are doing in meeting those expectations. It's really about helping them improve and rewarding them when they do well. And really what it comes down to is that the employer wants accountability from its employees, and therefore the employer must communicate that in advance to them. Research has shown that companies with successful performance management processes will outperform those that do not set effective goals or hold employees accountable for meeting those goals. If managers can effectively communicate their expectations and provide feedback to employees, the employees will become more engaged in their work and overall perform at a higher level, which is what every organization strives for. Many times, organizations mistake their annual performance appraisal process as performance management. However, the focus really needs to be on managing and improving performance and not just evaluations. It is a continuous process and not just an annual event. So here is a chart sort of outlining the differences between performance appraisals and performance management. Sometimes the terms are used interchangeably, and they do have some similarities, but they are definitely not the same. So looking at performance management, this is a process, and it's a process of managing and developing employee performance. It also involves planning, tracking, and assessing performance for a specific period. And the end result is to motivate employees and further increase their efficiency and their effectiveness. Performance appraisal is a reactive function that only evaluates past performance of employees. And in most organizations, it is usually conducted only once or twice a year. Performance management is proactive and it's very forward-looking, and it manages performance in an ongoing manner. So from this chart, we can see that performance appraisal is, in a way, an essential process that goes along well with performance management. However, it is really just one piece of the larger puzzle. So performance management as a system is usually a continuous cycle. It's based on cascading goals and objectives from an organization's own business plans and goals. It is built on a foundation of trust and respect, and it requires measurement and regular feedback. And this is to achieve continuous improvement. So simplified, it really is just aligning employee goals with the organization's goals and then engaging with employees and measuring their accomplishment of their goals. Here is the entire performance management process, all the way from planning to coaching and evaluating, and then finally to developing. Let's take a look at this model in greater detail over the next few slides. So step one, which is the planning stage. So in this stage, the groundwork for organizational success is laid down. Before management talks to employees, they should be meeting to decide the organization's goals and objectives for the year. Where you want to go as an organization, and how will success be measured, and what does success look like? So this involves the overall strategy for the business, which will then translate into personal objectives for all employees, and will include development goals, specific tasks, targets, actions, and behaviors. And just to note that organizations of all sizes should put time into this very critical business practice. Without that critical information, any planning with employees will not be effective. And once the management team knows the details of what they want employees to achieve, then it's time to meet with each employee and make a strategic plan for the year with each employee. This should be a collaborative process, given that an employee who understands why they are setting specific goals and tasks is more likely to be invested in succeeding at them. And generally, goals can be outlined using the SMART method, and I'll cover that off in just a few slides. And again, if you have any questions, please put them through the Q&A, and I will be answering them all at the end of the webinar. So what does an alignment involve? So it's about telling employees what they want and need to know. And really, it comes down to just being your organization's mission and vision. So here are some of the questions that you can help them answer when you're going through the process of aligning the strategic goals of the organization with the goals of the employees themselves. So goal setting, using the SMART approach, this is where goals have to be specific. So the goal needs to be clearly outlined. So information like what is it to be achieved, how well it must be done, and why is it important. The next piece is ensuring that it's measurable. So the goal must have a definite and measurable indicator to tell if it has been achieved. Sometimes this can be tough depending on what the goal is. However, if there is some metrics that you can attach to measuring the goal, that always works great. And then next, you want to ensure that the goal is achievable or attainable. So while the goal should stretch the employee, it should not be so lofty that it's not realistically achievable. The goal should be relevant, so making sure that it's in line with the employee's job and the overall goals of the organization. And then time-based, so there should be a definite timeline as to when this goal should be completed. Again, each goal is set by the employee, and it should align with the organization's goals and contribute to achieving them. In setting the goals, management can also put in place an employee development plan. So in the beginning stage of the performance management cycle, management gets an opportunity to identify any areas of training and development in which an employee needs to maybe strengthen and set goals that will achieve that. And creating an employee development plan really demonstrates that management is actively working with the employee to assist them in becoming more skilled and just a more valuable player in the organization. Step 2, coaching. This is a key function in achieving the goals that are set out in the planning stage. The coaching or monitoring will not be as effective if it is only done once or twice during the year. So I highly recommend that management meets with each employee one-on-one, perhaps on a monthly or quarterly basis, to check in on progress, offer any help that might be needed, or assist in solving any problems that might have come up. And sometimes you just need to meet to adjust goals depending on sort of what the organization's direction is. Just in response to that, just meeting regularly can make sure that the employee is on target with achieving their goals. And just a note that if you're only doing yearly goal setting, problems can arise from poor planning and lack of motivation. So for an employee, having a large, potentially far off goal can be intimidating, or it can seem so far off that the employee just doesn't take the proper and actionable steps. So I really suggest breaking the goal down into monthly sub goals. This makes the process easier, and it just gives the employee more manageable tasks around the goal. And also just keeping employees informed of the results at all levels. So letting them know how the organization is doing in attaining its goals can help them sort of have that motivation around achieving their own specific goals as well. And you want to share any success stories and provide recognition along the way. So being an effective coach, here are some tips. Some of the important ones include building trust. Next, I would say speaking directly. This is a very important one. You want to be honest and direct when coaching and providing feedback to employees. This is oftentimes where managers may often fail, and because they're not direct with employees, or they're not being honest with the delivery of the feedback, or maybe it's not respectful. So another important one on this list is modeling the behavior, and that refers to being respectful in communication or even showing accountability. When there is an issue that you do need to discuss with an employee, my suggestion is to confront the issue itself versus the person. And I'll go over this in a few slides to show some examples on how this can be done. And really just being an effective coach, isn't simple. These tips will help, but they are difficult conversations, and just sort of keeping these things in mind will help flow the conversation in a more positive direction. So next, I'd actually like to ask everyone on the call a question, and that is, what are some of the elements that are impacted by a good performance management program? I'm going to just launch the poll here. Okay, so just have everyone vote on what they think some of the elements are that are impacted by having a good performance management program in place. I'll just wait another couple of seconds to allow everyone to put their vote in. All right. So 60% said all of the above. And then some of you thought potentially just employee performance or just job satisfaction. I'm going to stop the poll and then we'll go over the results in just a quick sec. Let's see. The answer, studies have shown that not only performance, but also job satisfaction, employee retention, and loyalty are all positively impacted by having a comprehensive performance management program in place. And generally, like I mentioned earlier, the performance management program has these items listed here, included in the program. How to give positive feedback. More of an art than anything else, but there are some tips. So you want to ensure that you are describing the behavior. Be prepared with a variety of examples. Explain the impact of the behavior to the team and the organization. Be clear in communicating what is effective or successful so it will continue. And lastly, give recognition for positive behavior. In terms of giving constructive feedback, this is often a little bit more difficult than providing positive feedback. However, there are tips and steps that you can take to ensure that the conversation is more positive than negative. So you really want to be specific. You want to focus on the behavior and not the person. So for example, if the behavior is excessive absences, you really just want to focus in on the issue versus the person themselves. You want to describe the significance of the behavior for the team and the organization, so the impact that it has. I suggest remaining calm and be selective in delivering only what a person can receive. Watch for nonverbal cues, listen to the individual's perspective of the behavior and or the situation, and then identify the benefits of improving the behavior, and then just balance the positive and negative feedback. Again, this takes practice. It's difficult given employees generally feel defensive when receiving critical feedback. However, I think just focusing on, again, some of these tips and just trying to have a positive conversation versus making it a negative one, even though you're delivering some negative information, can really work in your favor. Step 3, evaluating. So at the end of the year, management and the employee meet to review the previous year and see if the goals were met. This is generally the performance appraisal evaluation stage, and you can use multi-source feedback by asking for feedback on an individual from their coworkers, their managers, or their clients. And if proper coaching was done, then management will already have an idea of how well the employee did during the year. There should really be no surprises during this meeting. The review is a chance for management and employees to evaluate both the final result and also the process itself. And generally, the evaluation includes questions such as, was the original goal realistic? Was the goal in line with the organization's objectives? Did the employee gain useful experience or skills? How well did the employee complete their tasks? And did the organization offer the right amount of support to achieve the goal? And potentially, what aspects of the process could be streamlined or improved? And the employee can present their perspective on how well they did during the year and receive feedback from management on how well they met or exceeded their goals. And if there have been performance issues during the year, this is where they can be brought up. It is recommended that if issues are being discussed, that possible solutions are also presented. For the evaluation form, you can use really any format that makes sense for your organization. Something to keep in mind is to ensure that managers are trained on using the tool that you're using, paying attention to the rating score and what each one specifically stands for. What you want to avoid is managers sort of going through and just rating everyone always at that average rating of meeting expectations. It really doesn't help the employee or the organization from a development perspective. And so just really helping managers pick a score and then encouraging them to provide supportive examples to support the rating. All right, so recognition. Now, this is an extension of evaluations, and really you want to sort of answer the question, what is the outcome of good performance at your organization? What does it lead to primarily for the employee? And what incentive do employees have to perform above par in their goals? You can't expect employees to stay motivated if their achievements are never rewarded. And these don't have to be compensation related rewards. There's a list there of all different kinds of rewards. Sometimes organizations overlook this key element. So you just want to make sure that employees are compensated or recognized for their hard work. And this definitely will help to improve your employees' engagement and then ultimately positively impact their performance. I do have a second polling question. However, I'm actually going to skip over it because of time. I just want to make sure we fit in all of the slide information. The question here was, with regards to recognition, what do you think employees value most? And I want to share with you that a lot of research has been shown that compensation is not always the biggest motivator. There are many other factors which employees value, and we can go over some of them here, but we also went over some of the potential rewards you could use on the previous slide. So what do people want? People want respect, trust, they want control over what they do. So this refers to autonomy in their role. They want to have an opportunity to do a good job. They want to come to work and connect and build trusting relationships. They expect fair treatment. And then they want to take pride in what they do and in their accomplishments, and also to have some prospect of learning. And it really comes down to values and relationships. So engagement leads to many benefits. Employees are excited about coming to work and performing the work. They are committed and they're emotionally connected. Generally, they are high performing and self-motivated. And of course, they will be on target to achieving their goals and their objectives. So this is the ultimate goal, is to get your employees to a stage where they're all engaged in the work that they're doing. Step 4, which is the final step, is developing. Now, this is an opportunity to focus on improving your employees' engagement and job satisfaction, and also for wrapping up the performance management cycle. So during this stage, you've completed the annual review, and from that, either the employee or yourself have highlighted areas where the employee may need or want more development. This could be a skills gap or a training gap. So if there is an opportunity to address a training or skills gap, this can be done through creating a personal improvement or a personal development plan. Some pointers to keep in mind during the performance management process. Again, some of this might be repetitive, but we just want to make sure the most key items are put across. So set objectives with the employee, provide regular feedback. A best practice around this is a formal review at year end and at mid-year or after each quarter. So ongoing feedback to reinforce the good and to correct the not so good behaviors. You want to make sure you prepare for the performance review. And what this looks like is just making sure that you have documentation to support any examples that you're bringing forward. You may want to solicit feedback from others. And you also want to ensure that you identify any new objectives or development opportunities to prepare for the meeting. And then lastly, you have to meet with the employee, discuss any important points, establish any new objectives, and then discuss career expectations. And when coaching isn't enough, you will want to follow the corrective action process, which is a process of communicating with the employee to improve their behavior or their performance, generally after other methods such as coaching or the performance appraisal have not been successful. All employees are expected to meet performance standards and behave appropriately in the workplace. The goal is to guide the employee to correct performance or behavior by identifying the problems, the causes, and possible solutions. And it's not really meant to punish the employee, it's to correct the behavior. Corrective action is usually progressive, so with the lowest severity being the verbal warning, and then going up to the more severe repercussions, which may end in termination. So with the verbal warning, just some tips around that. A manager should set up a time and place for the meeting to occur to ensure there's privacy. It's really good practice to make notes in advance of the meeting, just so you can stick to your script, you know what you have to say, and you can get the points across. And you want to state in the meeting that clearly that you are issuing a verbal warning. Because it is a verbal warning, I've been asked in the past, how does that get documented in the employee's file or it's sort of in their performance history? I would say if you are making notes of the meeting and those become part of your sort of working employee file, that's a great way to document it, or even to document it on performance appraisal if it is soon after issuing the verbal warning. So in terms of what to say, so you want to be specific in describing the unacceptable performance or behavior. For example, if it was something to do with punctuality, you could state, we are meeting today to discuss your punctuality. I've brought this issue to your attention several times before, and yet you still continue to arrive for work late. Therefore, I'm issuing this verbal warning. I expect you to arrive for your scheduled shifts on time. And then if you continue to be late for work, further disciplinary action up to and including termination could occur. So that's basically the gist of what the meeting should be about. You're not there to sort of investigate or really to try to understand why the employee is constantly late. There's probably a influx of reasons, probably varying each day to day. So, but you're really there just to tell them that the behavior is unacceptable, and any repercussions if the behavior doesn't change and it continues. I came across this great saying, which is that in the long run, it's not the employees that you terminate that will cause you the most problems, it's the ones that you keep. So if you get to the stage of having to terminate an employee, let's say you go down the corrective action process and you get to termination. To mitigate your organization's risk against legal action, I highly recommend taking into consideration employment standards, human rights legislation, and also, if possible, speak with a lawyer or HR professional before proceeding with a termination, especially if you're going down the route of just cause. Those are a little bit more difficult to sort of support. So just ensure that you've got all of your information to back that up. Things that you want to keep in mind. You want to use a termination checklist just to guide you in all the steps and ensure that you cover off all pertinent items. Pay attention to location and timing. This really just means, usually earlier midweek is best. And this is so that the employee can access any professional help if they need, i.e. a counselor. You also want to ensure that it's not obvious, but can happen, that it's not on an employee's birthday, vacation, or time of personal trauma. I always recommend having a second person in the room, whether that be someone from HR, a supervisor, or a manager. You want to make it a quick process, so be brief and avoid emotional and potentially inappropriate remarks, and just be clear to the employee that the decision is irrevocable. Moving on, you want to obviously retrieve any belongings, make arrangements for the employee to return to retrieve personal items, potentially after hours, or even have the items couriered to their home. And this again helps the employee, it helps to avoid the employee going back to the staff and creating a scene or talking about what just happened. And also, one of the other issues that becomes difficult is advising other coworkers what's happened. And I would just encourage you to be transparent to the point where just saying the employee is no longer an employee. You don't want to disclose any confidential information, but you do want to say that this person is no longer an employee. You also want to ensure that you advise any terminated employee of their continued responsibility to uphold confidentiality. And this responsibility continues after they've been terminated as well. All right, closing thoughts. So the emphasis of a performance management process should be on managing people and talent, creating excitement about the process, reducing the negative energy created around performance reviews, enabling you to look at skills and abilities and finding the right fit, creating the mindset of positive reinforcement and staying on course. So you want your performance management program to allow you to develop your people and make changes to adapt to organizational and employee needs. And there we are, almost right on time. Ready for any questions that anyone might have. I don't know if there's been any put in the Q&A yet, but feel free to pop your questions in there and Zoe and I can help answer them.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like we're still just waiting for questions to come in. So we'll keep an eye on that box for the next 10 minutes. Definitely a complex topic. So if you have questions, please ask, because this is a great opportunity to get some of those questions answered. And just in the meantime, I saw a note here from Tracy wondering about any possible websites or resources for people to check out for a checklist for terminations. I do know that there's some great resources on the Alberta government website, but I wonder, Cindy, do you have any other suggestions?
To be honest, I think you can probably just Google termination checklist and a ton of information will come up, and really just look at all of them and sort of come up with a best practice. We, of course, have one that we can provide as well, and I can provide our information here. And really, it's just a simple list of all things that you want to remember, and you may have to customize them with your organization. Including, like, depending on if there's technology access that needs to be terminated, who needs to know, payroll, i.e., any departments, finance, IT. Yeah, Zoe, I think I agree with you. So employment standards would have a termination checklist, but again, there's lots of information and resources online as well.
Excellent. And just in the meantime, I have popped the link into the termination page of alberta.ca in the chat box if anybody would like to check that out.
Perfect.
And while we wait for some questions here, Cindy, a question I would have is when it comes to considering a performance improvement plan or a performance development plan, would you say there's any kind of golden rule of thumb of how long you should let that plan play out before you make any decisions about whether or not the performance has improved or if maybe termination is the next step?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. I also want to distinguish the difference between a performance improvement plan versus a development plan. Generally, in my experience, a development plan is catered more towards maybe a newer employee, and it's when an employee is maybe lacking some skills or training. It generally isn't used to correct a performance issue. However, a performance improvement plan is the opposite, where if you have an employee that has a performance issue, so they're fully capable, they've been trained, they have the skills, and it just comes down to performance. They're either not wanting to perform at the level they need to, or have some sort of barrier that doesn't have to do with skills or education or training. I would say then use the performance improvement plan. And then in terms of timing, you definitely want to have it timed. So have an end date, start and end date, usually around 3 months. And it kind of depends on the issue. So if it's punctuality, let's say, that's not going to be a 3-month PIP. You would probably do that over a month to say, okay, you've got all these issues. Could it be transit or children or whatever it is? How do we make sure that you are on time for work every day? And these are the hours. So then that would probably be a shorter time frame. But however, if there's something that's a bigger performance issue, I'd say about 30 to 90 days is probably the appropriate time frame. Yeah. And you do want to meet with the employee throughout as well, just to make sure that you're covering your bases and making sure that you're supporting them with anything they may need during that process.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. And still just waiting for some questions. So maybe I'll ask another. Cindy, you touched quickly on the difference of going through with termination for just cause and also without cause. Do you maybe want to differentiate the two, and do you have any tips for a manager to choose which route to take?
That's a difficult question. I think it really depends on the scenario. So I've been at organizations where there have been some really contentious performance issues or employee conduct issues. For example, harassment, privacy breaches, disrespectful behavior, violence, anything along those lines would definitely qualify as just cause versus I'm going to issue you a verbal warning or I'm going to issue you a written warning. I think there's sort of a threshold of severity of performance where you would go right to just cause. But then there's some of those ones kind of in the middle. And for those, I'd say, honestly, talk to your HR person, whether that be somebody in-house or external, because it really just depends. And you really want to make sure you've covered off your bases. If it is a performance issue, you do have that corrective action process that you can follow. So start with a verbal warning, give some time to improve, then move to the written warning, give some time to improve. So just making sure that you've gone through the steps, because if it was to go to litigation, it's going to be asked of you to say, like, what did you try to do as an employer to support this employee, and what steps did you take versus jumping right to termination.
Okay, great. So it sounds like regardless, documentation is definitely a key step in
Yes.
every level of this. That's great.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we still have about 8 minutes, so we'll just stay on here and see if anybody has any questions. Like I mentioned in the chat box, if you do have a specific situation you want to run by, you can definitely enter that anonymously and keep any names out and still kind of get Cindy's feedback. So please enter if you have anything.
Yeah, and I would hope, I mean, I think with organizations of all sizes, as I mentioned, that there's just some sort of program in place, whether it's formal or informal. I mean, not every organization may feel the need, if there's only like 3 or 4 people, may feel the need to have a formal performance appraisal process in place. And in those cases, I suggest just having those conversations. I think that's the most important thing that you can do, is to provide feedback to your employees. And it goes right back to engagement. You want to reduce your employee turnover. And so the only way to do that is to keep your employees engaged. And this is one big piece of it. And sometimes it can be overlooked. So definitely have the conversations, provide feedback. And if you can come up with some sort of recognition program, it could just be a simple, let's send an email to each other once, here and there, just to say thank you or that you've done a great job. And then maybe potentially highlight it to the rest of the staff. It just goes sort of that next step and recognizing employees and making them feel that they're valued for sure.
Absolutely. In terms of customizing your approach to unique personalities within your organization, would you say that's an important component of designing your process to make sure you're meeting the different needs of a person? Say they were maybe a little bit more extroverted and really like to have those one-on-one conversations, compared to some who might be a little bit uncomfortable sitting down and having that face-to-face.
That's a really good question too. So yes and no. So I think generally in HR, we say try to keep things consistent. However, you have to still factor in that personal side of individuals and that distinction of people, right? And so I think as a manager, I would suggest talking to your employee and all your employees and asking them sort of what is their preference for feedback and what is their preference of how much they need to touch base. You may have a newer employee who needs a little bit more support and would be happier if you met with them on a weekly basis for the first couple of months. Whereas you might have a tenured employee who says, you know what, I don't need to see you every week. I can come to you if I need something or if I have a question, but let's meet maybe every 2 weeks. Something like that. So whatever kind of works for each individual, you can totally cater and customize the sort of meetings and feedback and that sort of thing. But just I think doing something is better than nothing. And then just making sure that at least the end process, whether that's the appraisal, formal or informal, is somewhat consistent. That just goes back to sort of that fairness piece. You don't want to be having a documented performance appraisal for one employee, but not for another employee sitting right next to them. So that's a balance, consistency and customization.
Absolutely. I recently did a reference check for a potential employee, and I found I was able to get some insight as early in that reference check of some feedback from the previous manager of, oh, so-and-so really does like those casual conversations and not making it this big, stringent, kind of stressful process. So I thought that was interesting that you can get that feedback so early on in the onboarding process.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's probably exactly what you would want as an employer, is to know kind of exactly how people like to be, connecting with, right? And so I think that's good to know that in advance.
Yeah, especially if anybody's starting from scratch of maybe implementing something, it's a great opportunity to see what your people want, right?
Yeah, and then in terms of the performance appraisal and new employees specifically, I think keeping in mind the employment standards requirement of that 90-day probation period, definitely have some sort of conversation at that 90-day period to let the employee know if they have passed probation, and if they haven't passed probation, strongly recommend that you have conversations prior to the 90-day expiry. So hopefully you're meeting regularly with the employee and letting them know if they're not performing at the standards of the expectations of the job. That way it's not a surprise if let's say their employment is ended because of an unsuccessful probation period.
Awesome. Well, we still have a couple of minutes. If anybody does have a question, we'll stay on the line and just see. But other than that, it's been a pleasure learning a bit more even for me, Cindy. So it's been great.
Awesome. Sounds good. And yes, and if any questions come up after the fact, specific scenarios or whatnot, please reach out. And this information will be available, and since we didn't really have any questions come up, we'll use the FAQs that the questions that Zoe and I sort of addressed. We'll put them in a document so that everyone's got them. They can use them for future reference. Thank you, everyone.